Hey, deserving listeners, 90-Day Fiancé, let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. This is the Psychology in Seattle YouTube channel. As I always say, since this is a psychology YouTube channel, these episodes might contain triggering material, so watch with care. Let's watch.
After that, Jenny and I had a big fight. Jenny felt I picked my family over her, but I just lost my family. I was hoping that I will never come to a situation where I have to choose one over another. But right now, I'm really heartbroken. I really don't know what to do.
All right, so they are going to have a talk the next day after having a huge fight and stressful time with Sumit's family the night before. And it's good that they are going to sit down. They seem intent on talking about that. She seems calmer at this point. So let's see how they manage the makeup phase of a conflict, which is universal. All of us will hurt each other's feelings in all relationships, but particularly spousal relationships, and that's not abnormal or dysfunctional necessarily. What is dysfunctional is not having a sit-down, makeup, talk or gesture or something, some sort of communication that you care and that you're sorry. Let's see what happens. Now, I imagine the kicker here is that will Jenny recognize that her assumption was false, that she was jumping to conclusions, or because she seemed to believe that Sumit was rejecting her, which it was not, because she couldn't understand what they were saying in Hindi. And what was really happening was he was absolutely distraught at the fact that his mom was disowning him and saying, "I never want to see you again." And he was distressed. So Jenny was also upset because Sumit wasn't interpreting what was happening, but I think we can understand given the tension of what was happening. And also, I think there's a tendency that when you have a partner or a friend that doesn't speak your language and the language you're speaking with other people, there's just this, you're just not used to realizing that as you're talking to one person, another person that you also can communicate with has no idea what is being said. So as an analogy to this, sometimes I'll hear people in other languages talking to their pets, to their dogs and cats. And I'm always like, wow, that must be what it sounds like to be a dog. Because when my wife or when I am talking to the dogs, there's this fantasy that somehow the animals know. Now, of course, animals do pick up on context and tone of voice, and they can memorize words, but they really don't understand what's being said. They don't understand the 99% of the verbal content that's being communicated. And so when you hear someone in another language talking to their dog, and I don't understand that language, I'm just like, wow, why are you using so many words? There's no point in that because the dog doesn't understand you. But I do that all the time. So I think there's this disconnect of other people. So I think for Sumit, he might be like, I don't understand why you didn't understand. But of course, why would Jenny understand what was happening? But I don't know. I feel like Jenny should have given him the benefit of the doubt because there was no reason to believe that Sumit somehow in that moment had changed his mind and was like, okay, I'm going to divorce her. There was no reason for her to believe that. We understand why she would have those ideas. But anyway, let's see how they talked about this.
I just got so upset because I just knew that you were going to go after your parents and I was going to be left sitting there by myself.
Okay, he didn't go after the parents. He walked them out so that he could hug his mom and try to warm her up. He was trying to show his dedication to the family. So what's so wrong with that? Now, I don't know. Maybe Jenny has some sort of trauma around that, maybe even with them, but that doesn't seem really reasonable. So hopefully they can iron that out.
And I didn't know what was going on. I only knew what I thought was going on. And by the time you came and tried to comfort me and tell me what was going on, it was too late. I was already thinking the worst. I was thinking I lost him. He went to his mom. I knew it was going to happen. And that's why I yelled at you and lashed out at you the way that I did.
Okay, this is a great start. She's leading the way. I'm worried about what Sumit... Sumit basically has just a couple of modes with Jenny that I think reflects his modes with his mom, which is compliance and trying to please. And then when he's pushed to a certain level, he just sees her as a complete idiot. I don't think he does a lot of really opening up and being vulnerable, which we would understand why he would be scared of doing that. But I would hope that he would say something like, well, I'll tell you, it just really hurt because I was going through something really hard, and I was at least hoping that you would understand or be neutral or something. But then when you were yelling at me and you came at me with aggression, physical aggression, it was scary and devastating to me. I didn't know what to do. And so I hope he could say something along those lines. But anyway, so she has a good opener. She's saying, I was sitting there unaware of what the content of what you were talking about, and I filled in this story that wasn't true, and it was building over time, because I was saying this last week that we don't know how long that conversation went, because a lot of times it's like hours, but they only show us 5 minutes. So you just imagine yourself sitting there for hours while your husband is talking with their parents and they seem really upset, and you feel worse and worse and worse and judged and rejected. And you just having that feeling build in you, and by the time the parents leave, you just explode with anger because you've been building. And that was my guess, and that's what she's saying. But so on some level, she's admitting that she exploded, meaning that she was being unfair. But I would hope that she would say something like, that was 100% on me. Like, yes, you should have, like you promised, interpreted a little bit for me so I would know what was happening. But now looking back, I kind of understand where you're coming from. And the transgression that you did there is really nothing compared to what I did. I'll tell you, I didn't do it on purpose, but I get the position that I put you in. So hopefully she could, but often people on this show, they don't go that far. But anyway.
It's really disappointing to see that Sumit hasn't really moved on from getting his parents' approval. It's been over 10 years. Come on, let's be done with it, Sumit. But
yeah, totally. I think a lot of people in the Western, world would agree with that. But you would think that Jenny would understand, especially having lived in India for a good amount of time, been there a lot of the time, in the 10 years that they've been together, that she would understand, okay, the way that I think things should be is not the way that 99% of people in India think. And so I have to incorporate that into my evaluation of this. To me, after 10 years of trying desperately, I would give up on my parents. But people in India typically don't do that. And so I have to consider that. And a lot of the people on the show, I think particularly the Americans, maybe only the Americans, just seem to not understand that there are other ways of thinking. There are other cultures around the world, that there are completely different paradigms, and the American paradigm isn't superior or something. So you would think that she would understand. But from my understanding, and honestly, even when I am working with a client who, so say Sumit was raised in a mainstream American cultural idea that you don't really need your parents, and at a certain point you can and should distance yourself and draw boundaries, especially with parents like his mom. And when I work with people like that, it's not as if they're over it, typically. They still have tremendous fusion and anger and hurt and preoccupation with it. They've just adopted a policy of distancing themselves because it hurts to approach them all the time. So even if Sumit had broken ties with her and had a policy of like, okay, what's the point? I'm just, beating my head against the wall. It's not like that would end the grief and the pain.
But he got up and went after them, and that really hurt my feelings.
My first duty was just to comfort my parents, because I know that it's a shock for them as they were thinking we're not going to marry.
Right, that's another point. I forgot about that the parents had just found out that they were married, which was the primary issue for the mom. So the mom, of any time they've ever had a conversation, this was the time the mom was absolutely going to flip out. And also the son, Sumit, would also be very concerned. So if there's ever a time where you should, as Jenny, give your husband some grace because this is going to be difficult for everyone, it would have been that time. But Jenny doesn't seem to understand that.
And I'm losing my family just for you, and I thought you were here to support me, and as a wife, I was expecting more from you.
Okay, yes, totally understand what he's saying, but he could word it differently. There's a harshness to that. And, who knows how Jenny receives it. It's all about how she interprets it. But when we are communicating, this is key for everyone out there, regardless of the relationship you're in, it's important to, what I call, be diplomatic. And sometimes you think, but I don't want to be diplomatic. I don't want to tiptoe around what happened the other day. And I get it, but especially if you're in a long-term relationship and you want to make things actually get better, then the more tentative and the less harsh, the less accusatory, the better things are likely to turn out. I actually learned this as a child from my parents. I would observe the way that they talked to us as kids, or my mom actually had a daycare. I've talked about this sometimes in our house. So for, from the time I was 7 until I was 18 and moved out, there were kids, a dozen, 15 kids running around in our house. And we did not have a big house. They slept in my bed. I come home from school and I couldn't go into my bedroom and hide away like a brooding, angsty teenager because there was some kid taking a nap in my bed. And I talk about this sometimes, but I have to say it again. I guess it's part of my process, my grief, is that one time my mom didn't tell me, oh, by the way, there's a kid in your room, because she would say that. So I was coming home and just being a 15-year-old and stomping around and not really considering other people's feelings. And I, busted into my room like Kramer on Seinfeld, because that's kind of how I was and am. I'm not a tiptoer. I move quickly and open doors quickly, sometimes to my wife's chagrin. Anyway, so I busted into my room and I'm just ready to, throw my bag down and just close my door and listen to some music or whatever was going through my mind at the day. And I bust in it just breaks my heart to think there's a kid that was new to the daycare, because a lot of the kids I knew and had bonded with to some extent because they were great kids. They were mainly around 4 years old. That was the kind of primary group that my mom had in the daycare. Anyway, so I bust into the room as a new kid who doesn't know me. And the kids tended to be pretty scared of me at first because I was a big teenager and they just were scared, most of them. So, it just breaks my heart. I bust into my room, which is my right, and it's normal to do that. But the kid suddenly wakes up in my bed. It's just a little weird, just like this stranger is in my bed, in my room. Anyway, so I busted. Kid just shoots up, and his eyes look like he's very tired, obviously, just wake up. And he snaps around and looks at me, and he just looked like the way that people look in a horror movie when the ghost comes around the corner. He just looked so scared. And it was shocking to me too. We both kind of shocked each other. And since I was a dick as a 15-year-old or whatever, I just went, rolled my eyes and whatever, and closed the door. I might have even slammed it. I don't know. And just stomped off and sulked somewhere else in the house. Again, not a big house. Like the daycare portion of the, in our house took up 2/3 of the house. Anyway, point is that was awful. And whenever I think about kids being in my room, I think about that moment. It just breaks my heart. There's so many other things I could have done. Okay. I could have thought, is there a kid in here? Just kind of peek in there. Or when I busted, I see that, oh, sorry, you're okay. You're all right. Something, I don't know, or return back to the room and say, you're okay. What's your name? You can sleep here. It's totally fine. Or I don't know. There's a number of things like that as a child that plague me to this day. Like my little brother, I would terrorize and not terribly so, but kind of. And I've apologized to him dozens of times, and every time he's like, "Kirk, I don't remember that. Don't worry about it. Stop apologizing." But it just breaks my heart, to think that you would. I don't know. It just feels bad. Anyway, so that's me right now. Why did I go down that road? Oh, anyway, so I learned from my parents. So I would see my mom talking to kids, and very diplomatically. And in my head, I'm like, my mom should be pointed and logical and obvious and to the point. But when I saw her, she would be very tentative about things. She'd be like, well, it could be that maybe this would work out better for you, that kind of language. And the kid would think, oh, okay, maybe it would be better. Instead of just coming at a kid and saying like, you need to do this, or you're wrong, the other kid is right, you're wrong. It was way more tentative, softer, and effective. So the same goes when we talk to our partners, that when Sumit can say to Jenny, I expected a better partner. This is what he's saying. A more diplomatic way of saying it is, so I always say this: return to pain or fear. I don't know why I'm putting pain and fear, but pain and fear is where it all generates from in my model of human emotion and behavior and attachment, relationships, conflict. So if you return to that and you think, okay, I will start the sentence, when you did this, it hurt my feelings, it gave me emotional pain, or it scared me in this way, or sometimes both. So, and you do it in a non-accusatory way. You might even have caveats. So if he were to be, in my model, a better communicator, and by better, I don't mean softer, I mean effective. We want to be effective communicators. We want our partners to understand what we're saying, to not get defensive, and to incorporate our feelings into their model of understanding us, so that in the future they can consider that and not do it again, right? So if you are pointed or harsh, even though it feels right, even to people from the outside, and the person gets defensive or is overly hurt or something, it's not as likely to change behavior in the future. So he could say something like, look, I totally understand where you're coming from. I know I agreed to let you in and tell you I should have done that, but I'll tell you what was happening between me and my parents and my brother and my sister-in-law. It was so traumatic for me. It was one of the worst things that I could have imagined going through. And I know you understand that, but in my culture, like, this is central to us. To be rejected and disowned by one's parents, particularly one's mother, is just like tantamount to death. And it was harsh. So yeah, I should have included you, but I was going through something, and I don't think he's used to saying this sort of thing. He might not even know what's going on in himself. Maybe wasn't allowed to develop this self-awareness, or that it's okay for him to have emotion given the way his mom treated him. Anyway, so he could say something like that. I was really going through something. You're right, and I'm sorry, but I hope you understand what was happening for me at the moment. And then when everything was over and my parents leave and I turn to you, I felt like I had fought and have this whole time for us, for you. And then you interpreted the whole situation wrongly, as if I was choosing my parents over you, which I have to say hurts my feelings that you would assume that, because I don't see really any evidence of that. I walked outside, but I was just trying to get my mom to come around to our marriage, to you. And so there's that. And then when you started yelling at me, it was like, I just didn't know what to do. I felt like I was alone. I didn't have anyone. It was embarrassing. The cameras were there. It was really hurtful to me. And maybe I should have been able to be stronger or something in the moment and include you and explain to you. But I'll tell you, like, it just never crossed my mind after a certain point, because I was so devastated by what my mom was saying. And maybe in the moment, I also thought if I did include you, I didn't really know what would happen from that because I was worried that you were going to explode. And then, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. So that's my role play of, that's more tentative. It's more taking responsibility. There's caveats there. I'm bouncing back and forth between empathy for myself, compassion for myself, and empathy, compassion for the other person. It's like, yeah, I see where you're coming from, but where I was coming from was really, and emphasizing vulnerability, particularly to you avoidant attached individuals, and maybe particularly to you men out there, but really everyone, is vulnerability is the key. Vulnerability, true vulnerability, crying, expressing hurt, expressing fear, expressing confusion, expressing insecurity, expressing that you don't know what's happening, expressing that you have problems. It's very important that you have issues, and you're mostly good, but you got a few, unfortunate qualities. Everyone does, and admitting that up front. So. But I don't know. I think maybe she's reading between the lines, and sometimes that's all we can really hope for, is that we communicate effective enough, and our partners can read between the lines and not take it personally.
I wanted Jenny to comfort me. What are you doing in this relationship? If you don't even just support your partner, if you don't understand the situation and you are ready to give up, then you should not be in a relationship.
So that kind of talk, if he were my client, so it's sort of emulative of individual therapy, in that he's not saying those words to her when they're together, but alone. And you'll see this when you're a friend or a therapist, that people will be much harsher in their language, venting, if you will, to their therapist or friend. And if I were his therapist, I would listen, of course, and validate, but I would steer him away from, at the very least, communicating those thoughts, because he's making some global accusations about who she is, right? That, I mean, it's not extremely global, but it's bigger. Whenever we're communicating, even when we're thinking about, when we're narrativizing the situation. So let me give an example, given Sumit's situation. There's a temptation to say she's unsupportive. Okay, that's global, rather than a more micro perspective of, in that moment, I felt unsupported. So you see the difference? There's a huge difference between those two, narratives and communication. In that moment, I felt unsupported by you. Maybe you were being supportive, but I didn't feel it. I don't know. So that's taking responsibility. It's putting it on you. And if you have a good relationship, the other person probably should step forward and say, oh, well, that's kind of on me, or mostly on me. I wasn't being supportive, or something like that. But if you accuse someone, they get offensive, and they'll be like, I was supportive because, anyway. So the narrative is very critical. John Gottman and colleagues found that when we develop contempt, and that's what this is when you start to have global negative ideas about your partner, it's a form or possibly connected to contempt for the individual. You're making a conclusion about your partner that's not changeable, right? It's one thing to act in an unsupportive way, right? That's not a part of your personality. But if you are unsupportive as a human being, then you're doomed, right? That the person is unsupportive. You're never going to get your needs met. So now, sometimes the person literally is, they tend to be unsupportive as a human being. But even for those people, it's not conducive to the future of your relationship to see them that way. People can change. People can open up. They can alter their behavior. And if you make them defensive and hurt, then it's less likely to work. So I would point that out to them. I'd be like, so I hear you, but it might be more helpful to just think about this moment. Or I guess, honestly, what I would do if you were a client, I would say, like, so in your mind, have you made a conclusion that she is generally unsupportive all the time, like as a human being? Because usually with that question, the Sumits of the world will say, like, well, no, that's not really accurate. I think sometimes she's unsupportive. This goes for parenting as well. All these things apply to parenting. I'm sure you parents have heard or know that when your kid is misbehaving, you don't say, you are a bad child, or you are a misbehaving child. You are mischievous, or you are defiant, that kind of thing. Instead, you say, that behavior was not okay, or something. That behavior is bothersome in this way. Not you are bothersome, right? These are very important. And for some people, they don't really understand the difference. They're like, well, what's the difference? But there's a huge difference, right? There's a huge difference to that behavior. Imagine for yourself, you're told, hey, and especially if what's communicated to you is, hey, normally you're wonderful, no problems, love you. That one thing, not a fan. It's very different than you are a problem.
I understand everything you're saying to me right now, and it was wrong what I did. Yelling at you was wrong, and I'm sorry that I yelled at you, but you have to realize that I just went through a big thing too.
So, good. I'm sorry for yelling at you, and it seemed genuine. And this is, as far as conversations on this show, and maybe even in life, this might be in the top 5%. I mean, the fact that she's able to apologize for that is huge. But if you really want to be effective, an important principle to follow is one subject at a time. I learned this early in my career as a couples therapist, that people will rope in several topics all at once, and it gets real jumbled. And there's a lot of things that people are introducing that have to get covered, and sometimes it's impossible, particularly for people that don't know how to communicate that well, to do so. So in that instance, she's basically talking about two very important topics. One, that she overreacted, and two, that he, according to her, mistreated her in some way. Those are two big topics, very different. They're related, but they're important enough to have each topic fully discussed without any outside interference. So she says that, well, yeah, I'm sorry that I overreacted, but you have to understand. Plus, when you do that, it sounds like you're not really apologizing, right? Oh, I'm sorry I punched you in the face, but you made me angry. It sounds like, okay, are you actually sorry, or are you saying that it was natural that you did that thing? And you just want to slow down. If you're apologizing, no buts. Those are excuses, right? We don't want excuses. We want factors, explanations, not excuses.
I needed you too at the same time.
I'm sorry I left you alone.
Okay, this is in line with his behavior. There's not a lot of elaboration, and it's unclear if he is really apologizing or just saying it to get her to calm down, which I'm guessing he did with his mom a lot. So I don't know what's really happening. I think he's a good person. I think he cares, but I wonder if in this moment he has a lot of distress and he's going to that space where, oh, she's ridiculous, and so I have to treat her like a ridiculous person. I have to go through the motions. There's certain things I got to say that'll get her to calm down, and then we can return to normal. So if I were her, having heard at least the way they edited that, I'd be like, elaborate. You're sorry you left me alone. Now, again, I think Jenny should, contextualize that that he didn't include her in on what they were talking about as a much, a far lower transgression than what she did.
So now I feel like we both are feeling better.
Yeah.
All right, all's well that ends well if it's effective. I don't know, though. If I were seeing this, it was really like this, I would say, okay, great. A lot of great things here, a lot of strengths, and maybe there is closure, maybe it is over. But I would suspect that there would be some residual hurt and fear around this that could have been soothed and resolved more, that will cause the next time anything like this to happen to be blown out of proportion because of these unresolved pains, which we could argue is why it happened in the first place. That they've had a lot of conversations on camera, off camera, in which she feels that he wronged her, right? A lot of us would agree in the past. He lied to her a number of times about various things, including getting married and all these. And she has every reason to feel like he has wronged her, that he has hurt her and not prioritized her. And because those resolutions, those make-up conversations were somewhat sufficient but not sufficient enough, perhaps that's what fueled her pretty high level of aggression in a situation where it just didn't seem to fit.
I'm sorry I yelled at you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I yelled at
I
you
have
too.
to stop saying these things that I say to you when I'm mad.
So there is good, great, but what I would, if I were there, I would encourage Sumit to be more vulnerable about the apology, more acknowledging of it. She's saying, I'm sorry I yelled at you. And what I would hope is that he could say, yeah, it was pretty hurtful. It was really concerning. It was scary. But I think he's in this constant mode of not being vulnerable, trying to appease, trying to get people to calm down because of what he went through as a child.
How do you feel now that you've told them? I mean, do you regret telling them?
Actually, I feel like a little torn. Like, as I said, I'm not regretting marrying. But I think if I'm happy, that will make my parents happy. But that is not happening.
So I'm a little worried about what's happening here. I think she's fishing by saying, do you regret? Where are you right now? Because it is kind of the crux of everything. Okay, now that we're married and the cat's out of the bag, you told the parents, where are you? Are you thinking about leaving me and because of what your parents are doing? I think that's the main foundation of all of her anger the previous night. So she's fishing, and if Sumit were to, and I think he's picking up on some of that because he says, well, I don't regret marrying you. But I think if he were to really read between the lines of what she's saying, he would lay it on a little thicker. Because to some extent, and this is important to think about, when you cross a threshold in life or in your relationship, there's reasons to believe that there's reasons to wonder, are things different between us? She would have every reason to wonder, like, okay, sure, you loved me and were wanting to be with me, but now that we've crossed this threshold of not only being married, but also telling the parents, and they truly have, because it's huge, because the parents, they're like, we don't want you to be with Jenny, we don't want you to be with Jenny, but there was still presumably a door that was open, right? But now, to some extent, that door has been slammed shut. So there's a test. Does Sumit truly still love me? Or is it going to change now that the parents have really enacted what they were threatening? And anyway, so he could be more addressing of that. Better yet, she could be more honest about what she's really asking, that she shouldn't fish, right? To just say, so now that this happened, I know I don't have any reason necessarily, but it makes me wonder, do you still really want to be with me? Even like, say your mom, because I think this is the question on her mind. Say your mom truly disowns you and never talks to you again. Do you still want to be with me? I know that would be really hard for you, but just where I'm coming from selfishly right now is I'm scared that now that you've seen what really will happen, that one, you'll leave me, two, you'll resent me and hate me, and that'll lead to bad things. So where are you?
And without their love and support, it's very difficult to make a happy life.
I mean, where do we go from here now? Like, what do we do now?
I think it's a better option is to just leave it on the time. But I will try to keep connecting with them.
The other thing is it's totally rational for Jenny to have tremendous hatred to the mom, the way the mom has treated her, which sometimes I forget because it's such apparently a cultural norm for the mom potentially to be having a good number of the attitudes and behavior that she does. And the way that the way that everyone seems to act in that circle, in that system, it's like the mom is perhaps completely justified. But if we just break down the behavior that has been, I mean, just imagine but something more resonant to us in the United States is you imagine you have a white woman who is dating a black man, and the white woman's parents are completely racist against black people and about their white daughter being with a black man. And so, this is a cultural manifestation that is normal in some communities, particularly in the past, but still exists in the United States. And so the white parents are adamant, if you marry that black man, I don't care how good of a person he is, that's disgusting, and I will disown you. And just imagine the anger, legitimate anger, that the black partner would have towards their in-law parents, right? For him, he's like, wow, and yikes, and I hate you, and I never want to talk to you again. I think, at least for me anyway, that analogy would make a lot of sense, right? So it makes total sense that Jenny's just like, I am done with these people. This is ridiculous. I'm over it. The way they treat you, the way they treat me, the hell that they put us through. They forced you to marry someone. They've threatened to kill themselves. They've been a part of a community saying they're going to drum up false allegations and get you put in prison. Remember that whole thing? These people are deplorable, which would be rational. So it makes sense that for Jenny, she's, I think, secretly just, and sometimes not so secretly, just like, let's move on. Put it behind you.
His parents and our happiness. I'm the one that's in this country by myself. He's all I have. He needs to remember that. We are now husband and wife, and he needs to behave like my husband. If you're going to keep being worried about your parents and getting their acceptance, and you never get their acceptance, then where does that leave me?
Yeah, I've been saying this, I think, for a while, that I think she has some issues regarding insecurity and attachment disruption, attachment insecurity, because she's connecting, I think, what is totally expected for him, Sumit, to have residual feelings and longing and hopes and effort put into trying to bridge the gap between him. She's equating that with, I am being displaced, I am being eclipsed, which is some of the time, I'm guessing, absolutely rational. But from my understanding, the majority of the time, they're not around the parents. They don't live anywhere near them. And I think day to day, their relationship is pretty normal, right? So I think that could have played into why she exploded the night before too, because she sees this connection or effort on Summit's part to be with the parents as effort away from her, which it does not mean that. It just means that Summit's trying, he's clearly with Jenny, and that's clear, but he also wants to have a relationship with his mom, and they're not mutually exclusive. They might be based on what the mom is forcing the situation, but Summit's like, it doesn't have to be that way. All right, well, if you want to get some merch or a cameo, there should be links below. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.